Hi, my name is Konstantin Baum. I'm a master of wine and this is my channel where we are thirsty for knowledge and wine. This series is called The Wine Tasting, where I do a deep dive tasting of some of the best wines in the world and some wines that might one day be amongst the best. Today we are tasting stars, to borrow a phrase that is associated with one of the most famous people from the Champagne region, Dom Perignon, and I'm going to taste the 2010 Dom Perignon that was just released. So make sure that you stick around until the end for the tasting of this beauty. Even though this wine is named after the famous Benedictine monk, Dom Perignon never even got to taste this wine because he died more than 200 years before this label was first released. Counter to popular belief, Dom Perignon didn't actually invent sparkling champagne. He was the cellar master at the Abbaye de Hautevillers and he improved the quality of champagne still wines quite significantly, but he didn't actually invent sparkling champagne. Another fun fact is that the brand name Dom Perignon was first registered by the Mercier Champagne House and was passed on to Moet et Chandon in 1927. The first vintage of Dom Perignon that was ever produced was the 1921 that was first sold in 1936. Until 1943, Dom Perignon was actually just the normal Moet et Chandon vintage wine that was rebottled in this very distinct traditional bottle. And the 1947 vintage was the first vintage of Dom Perignon that was made completely separately. Other important milestones include that in 1959 the first Dom Perignon Rosé was produced. In 1981, Dom Perignon was actually served at the wedding reception of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. It was the 1961 Dom Perignon from Magnums. And since 2000, the name Moet et Chandon has been dropped from the label of Dom Perignon to give the wine its own identity. So let's talk about the origins of Dom Perignon, the vineyards where the grapes are coming from for this wine. Moet et Chandon, the owners of Dom Perignon, own roughly 1,200 hectares of vineyards in the region, and roughly 50% of those vineyards are classified as Grand Cru. There's no detailed information on where the grapes for Dom Perignon actually come from, but the winery suggests that they are using grapes from the 17 sites in Champagne that are classified as Grand Cru, but they are also using some grapes from Premier Cru sites surrounding Hautevillers, where Dom Perignon originally worked. And this is why they are not allowed to put Grand Cru on the label, because they are also using some fruit from Premier Cru sites. If you want to learn more about Grand Cru, Premier Cru and everything with regards to Champagne, then check out my video on the Champagne region. I'll link it up somewhere up there. So let's talk about the wine now. Dom Perignon was always a vintage wine that was only released in exceptional vintages, and it was very rare in the past that more than 2 vintages in a row were declared for Dom Perignon. The only exception was 1969, 70 and 71, but since 98 only 2001 and 2007 were not declared for Dom Perignon. So either the vintages are just getting better, or they are just better at quality management, or they are not as selective as they used to be. Dom Perignon is a luxury item, but it is produced in very large numbers. The winery doesn't release any official numbers on production volumes, but estimates range between 5 and 7 million bottles per year, which is a huge number and which still shocks me. But at the same time, I gotta say that it is a great example for the fact that it is possible to produce great quality at great quantities. So Dom Perignon today produces 3 different ranges. The first one is the white Dom Perignon vintage wine that I'm going to focus on in this video. The second wine is the Dom Perignon Rosé, which is always a vintage wine and is usually quite rich and concentrated as a rosé wine from the Champagne region. And the third one is the Plénitude series, which is formerly known as the Œnothèque series. They are marked with a P on the label. The P2 wines actually aged for an additional 15 years sur latte in contact with the yeast, and the P3 wines get 20 more years sur latte in contact with the yeast. So those wines are more complex, more rich and more dominated by the yeast flavor, and they usually also get a lower level of dosage. So the base wine for this vintage Dom Perignon gets fermented in stainless steel at between 18 and 20 degrees Celsius. It undergoes full malolactic fermentation in tank, and it then gets re-fermented in bottle, as all champagnes do, and it gets aged for roughly 10 years on the yeast, and the dosage level usually is around 6 grams per liter, which is pretty dry. So when it comes to grape varieties, Dom Perignon is always a cuvée of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, roughly at equal parts. Sometimes it goes up to 60% of Pinot Noir or Chardonnay. The only exception was the 1970 vintage, when they used 65% of Chardonnay. If you want to learn more about Chardonnay, then check out my video on the grape variety. I'll link it up somewhere up there. I think it is over here. So let's talk about the vintage. 2010 was not a great vintage for Champagne. So the summer was actually pretty nice. It wasn't too hot, which is good for the production of Champagne. But in August, there were major rainfalls. And after those rainfalls, diseases spread all across the region. And many maisons didn't actually declare 2010 as a vintage. But the team at Dom Perignon decided that they want to do a very thorough selection of the fruit that is coming into the winery, and they believe that they made a great wine in a very difficult vintage. So before I start tasting the wine, I want to talk about Dom Perignon in pop culture. Dom Perignon has actually become really famous and is a status symbol today. The most famous association between Dom Perignon and something else is probably the association with the James Bond movies. James Bond drinks Dom Perignon 7 times in the movies over the last few decades. Today, the singer Lenny Kravitz is actually the creative director of Dom Perignon and does marketing and creates different labels for the brand. And Dom Perignon as a name is also mentioned in rap lyrics from rappers like Ja Rule, 50 Cent or A$AP Rocky. So before I open this bottle, I want to tell you what the price is. This bottle of 2010 Dom Perignon currently sells at 140 euros a bottle, and old vintages of Dom Perignon sell at crazy prices. 3 bottles of the 1921 Dom Perignon, the first vintage ever produced, sold at auction for $25,000 for example. So when I drink great champagne, I really want to make sure that I use a great glass. This is my favorite champagne glass. It's the Riedel champagne glass, which is really big enough to allow the wine to really shine. So let's open this wine. Dom Perignon has this weird foil that doesn't really open properly, so you just have to kind of rip it open by removing the agrafe. But hold on, this is a bit too boring. One second. This is much better. Shit, this is not what I expected. So I'm really making a fool of myself, because normally you should keep this bottle really cold when you want to open it with a saber. I had it at a really cold temperature, but then it stood there for, I don't know, an hour or whatever, and now it was a bit too warm. But anyways, I saved most of the champagne, so we're good. So as you can see, the wine has a beautiful fine perlage, which is pretty normal for a vintage champagne that has been aged for a long time. It's actually really delicate and fine. It has some citrus flavors, but there's also beautiful brioche and croissant flavors coming through. After a bit, the flavors change. They become a bit more exotic. You have some mango there, some ripe peaches. On the palate, it's really juicy and rich. You got lots of concentration, but it's not the most vibrant and fresh champagne. It's more a rich and exotic kind of champagne. So when it comes to food pairing, you could beautifully pair this wine with seafood. Lobster would be the classic combo with vintage champagne. Some people also serve caviar with champagne, but that doesn't work at all in my opinion. It just makes the wine taste very metallic and very harsh. But I'm going to go really basic, and I'm going to pair this wine with some crisps. So the idea is that this wine is really rich and vibrant, and this should go well with the salty crisps. So let's see. So the salty and fatty crisps actually go really well with the juicy and vibrant champagne, but in the end, next time I'd probably rather go for lobster. So before cleaning up this mess, I actually have to score this wine. Robert Parker gave this wine 92 points and Vinous gave it 93 points, which actually makes it the worst scored Dom Perignon of the century. This is obviously coming from a high level. But I also think that this is definitely not the greatest Dom Perignon I've ever tasted. The 2008 vintage, for example, that was released before this one was just amazing. And this 2010 Dom Perignon lacks structure and doesn't have the same vibrancy and the same freshness, the same completeness as some previous vintages had. But I still think it's a really good wine, but I would give it 91 points, so a little less than Robert Parker and Vinnes gave it. But yeah, it's still enjoyable and I'm definitely going to enjoy drinking this bottle. So thanks for watching. If you liked this video, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel to make sure that you're not missing any of my upcoming videos. The question of the day is, have you ever tried Dom Perignon? And if yes, which is your favorite vintage? Please comment down here. I also want to tell you that I really appreciated all of your suggestions on which wines to taste next. I actually compiled a list and I got some of them already on my shelves down there. So I'm definitely going to do some videos based on your suggestions. So stay tuned, and whatever you do, stay thirsty. And I'm going to stay thirsty tonight.